Hello everyone. Welcome to Roots Tech Connect and Find Your Family with Fire Insurance Maps. I'm Elizabeth O'Neill, a professional genealogist based in California, and I'm thrilled to be with you here today. Fire insurance maps are an incredible tool to help us visualize where and how our ancestors lived, as well as who their neighbors were, which businesses were nearby, what sort of access they had to schools, churches, transportation, and much more. I think you're going to find these maps to be very useful in your family history research. Before we go on, I just have a quick reminder that the content of this video, as well as the thoughts, views, and opinions expressed herein, belongs solely to the creator, and that's me, and do not necessarily reflect the views of Family Search International and Roots Tech. So here's what we're going to cover in this talk. We're going to start with the basics of what fire insurance maps are. We're going to cover a bit of history about why fire insurance maps were created in the first place. And then we'll talk about where you can expect to find fire insurance maps online. And finally, we'll cover the basics of how to use fire insurance maps for your family history research. We're specifically going to be talking about fire insurance maps for United States research, but these maps exist for many areas of the world. So the tips you'll learn here today can apply to researching with fire insurance maps for any area where they're available. So let's start by talking about what fire insurance maps are and why you should be interested in them in the first place. Fire insurance maps are an incredible source of detailed historic information about cities, towns, and urban areas. They were originally produced for the purpose of providing insurance underwriters with a catalog of information which they use to assess the risk of insuring a particular property. Fire insurance maps are large-scale, lithographed plans of a city or town, drawn at a scale of 50 feet or 100 feet to an inch depending on the publisher. And the maps list street blocks and building numbers that were in use at the time the map was made. Now, several companies have produced fire insurance maps over the years, including the Dakin Publishing Company, GM Hopkins and Company, GW Based and Company, and the most prolific and well-known of these, the Sanborn Map Company, which we'll talk about a lot in this talk. The original maps were lithographed in black and white and then hand-colored with wax paper stencils and watercolors. As costs of producing the maps rose over the years, map corrections were issued on printed slips of paper and pasted onto the older maps. Employees called pasters or correctors would visit the subscribers' offices to paste the slips on top of the old maps. If you ever have the opportunity to view these maps in person, you may be able to see the areas where the corrections were pasted in. The maps were published in bound volumes. Large cities would be covered by multiple volumes. The volumes ranged in length from one page to thousands of pages, depending on the size of the city or town. There would be multiple volumes to cover a large city like New York, Chicago, or Los Angeles. Here's what you can expect to find inside each map volume: a decorative title page, a master index showing the entire mapped area and the sheet numbers for each map. This page typically also includes the key, an index of street names and addresses, a specials index with the name of churches, schools, businesses, and other institutions. The maps may also contain information about prevailing winds, the population number, and a description of water sources and nearby fire departments and equipment. So let's take a look at what these items look like. Here's an example of the decorative title page for the Sanborn map of Washington, D.C., 1916. The maps themselves were drawn following strict, exacting guidelines, and the title page was really the only place where a designer's creativity could shine. And they're usually quite beautiful, so be sure you take the time to look at them. Here's an example of a master index from the same map volume. The colored squares indicate the mapped areas that are contained in that particular volume. And then at the bottom left, you can see the key. The colorful key was used to show a property's address and lot lines, what it was used for example, was it a dwelling, a hotel, a church, a business, what the building was constructed from, and whether or not it was fire resistant, the building's height and number of stories, the thickness of its walls, special features such as doors, windows, chimneys, garages, stables, and elevators, as well as its access to water from pipes, hydrants, cisterns, and more. You'll need the key to interpret the maps, so be sure that you make a copy of it for your files. Now here's an example of a street index. In the close-up, you can see the street name, the building number, and the sheet number where you'll find that particular address. The specials index is pretty much the same as the street index, except that it lists buildings by name. In the close-up, you can see an example of the name of a church and the sheet number where it can be found. Building numbers aren't included in the specials index. So now that you know what fire insurance maps are, let's talk about why they were created. This might make a bit more sense when you understand their history and their purpose. Insurance maps and plans originated in London toward the end of the 18th century in response to the need felt by fire insurance companies. They needed accurate, current, and detailed information about the buildings that they were going to insure. The American fire insurance industry dates to the mid-18th century, and American fire insurance maps were adopted in the mid-19th century. In 1850, George T. Hope, Secretary of the Jefferson Insurance Company of New York, decided that large-scale maps would be useful in calculating fire insurance risks. He gathered a committee to direct the project and hired William Paris, an English engineer, to survey and produce the maps according to the committee's standards. The Hope-Paris map of 1852 may be the first large-scale map made in America specifically for fire insurance underwriting. In 1866, the Aetna Fire Insurance Company hired a Massachusetts surveyor named Daniel A. Sanborn to map several towns in Tennessee. But Sanborn already had a project when Aetna hired him. In 1867, he produced Volume 1 of the Insurance Map of Boston with the imprint of D.A. Sanborn. Later that same year, he established the D.A. Sanborn National Insurance Diagram Bureau in New York. Sanborn's company dominated the fire insurance map industry well into the 20th century. By World War I, the Sanborn Company held a virtual monopoly in the fire insurance map-making business. A few small regional companies remained, but none were able to provide any true competition. Over the years, the Sanborn Company mapped more than 12,000 cities and towns in the United States, Canada, and Mexico. Believe it or not, the Sanborn Company still exists as a division of Environmental Data Resources of Southport, Connecticut, which uses the historical maps in environmental and industrial surveys. So now that you know what fire insurance maps are and why they were created, let's talk about how and where to find them online. The first place you want to check is the Library of Congress. The Library of Congress has the single largest collection of fire insurance maps, including those made by the Sanborn Company. The images are high resolution and in color, and they're available to download in GIF, JPEG, JPEG 2000, and TIFF formats. For greater detail, I recommend downloading the largest format your hard drive can handle. The Library of Congress maps are arranged by state, then city, and release date. Currently, there are over 25,000 sheets from more than 3,000 city sets online from 34 U.S. states, Canada, Mexico, Cuba sugar warehouses, and U.S. whiskey warehouses. Remember the first map made by the D.A. Sanborn Company of Boston in 1867? Well, here it is, courtesy of the Library of Congress. In the early 1990s, a company called Chadwick Healy launched a project to make Sanborn maps widely available through microfilm. Unfortunately, they chose to film the maps in black and white, losing the beautiful details from the color maps. Around 2001, ProQuest bought out Chadwick Healy and used the microfilm acquired through the purchase to create state sets of Sanborn maps. The images are still in black and white, like the microfilm, but they're very helpful for learning about an ancestor's life. Many libraries offer access to ProQuest, and some, like the Los Angeles Public Library, even offer remote access from home. So be sure to check and see what your local library offers. The Sanborn maps on ProQuest are available for viewing and downloading. Here's an example of what you can expect to see in the ProQuest Sanborn map collection. And as you can see, everything is in black and white, but you can kind of make out some shading where the colors used to be. This image is from the 1903 Lincoln, Nebraska map book. Historic MapWorks also has a fairly good-sized collection of fire insurance maps, but unfortunately, there doesn't seem to be an easy way to search for them. From the search page, you can try looking for the term Sanborn and then sorting the results alphabetically to find your desired location. Historic MapWorks offers high-resolution color images, which are available to view online, download, and you can order prints by mail for a fee. They also offer one-click georeferencing for some maps. Now, georeferencing is the process of placing one map or image over another with coordinated points, and it's helpful for seeing how an area has grown over time. Here's an example of Historic MapWorks georeferencing. This is an 1888 Sanborn map of Washington, D.C., which has been georeferenced over a present-day Google satellite image of the same area. Finally, many libraries, universities, and other organizations have their own online collections of fire insurance maps. The downside is that some collections are only available to local patrons with a ProQuest subscription or a library card. So if you live out of the area where you're researching, you may not be able to access some collections. But there are many, many other public collections, so it doesn't hurt to take a look and see what's available. In my quest to find fire insurance maps for my own research, I started compiling a list of all the links to public collections that I could find. And you can access this list on my website at thefamilyheart.com. This link is also in your handout. So now let's get to the good stuff, how to use these amazing maps for family history research. Now, as a side note, if you think there are no fire insurance maps for the area where your ancestor lived, you may be pleasantly surprised. But do keep in mind that most maps show only the built-up areas where property owners were likely to insure their holdings. If your ancestors lived in a very rural area, you may not be able to find maps to cover their home, but you might be able to find them for the towns they visited to shop, work, and conduct other business. The first thing we need to do is find out where an ancestor lived. Look for street addresses in the documents you've already accumulated for your ancestors, such as city directories and census records, passport and social security applications, newspapers, especially the social columns, land records and deeds, World War I and World War II draft registrations, and even vital records like death certificates often record the usual residence address of the deceased. So here you can see the 1900 U.S. Census schedule for Sioux City, Iowa. And down at the bottom is my great-great-grandfather, Henry Daigle, and his family. If we look closer, we can see that they lived at number 15 and a half Myrtle Street. So now we have an address. Next, we want to look for the fire insurance maps for the area where the ancestor lived. And then we need to locate the exact map sheet for the ancestor's address. To do this, you want to start by looking at the street index page, which is typically located at the back of the book. And then you want to find your ancestor's street name and building number to get the corresponding sheet number. Here you can see that I'm at the Library of Congress's collection of Sanborn maps for Sioux City, Iowa. This batch is from 1902, which was the closest date to the 1900 census enumeration. And down at the bottom is the street index. Enlarging that page and looking under the M section, we find Myrtle Street. Sheet 35 has building numbers for 1 through 130 on Myrtle Street. Now we need to find the street and correct dwelling or building number. We'll want to take a look at the key from the master index in order to find out what sort of building they lived in and how it was constructed. Now, just a tip, be sure that you use the key that's included with your map set. A different key may not have the details that you need for that particular map. Now here we are on sheet 35, and I followed Myrtle Street to number 15. So I'm guessing that 15 and a half would be the building right behind 15. And using the key, it looks like Great-Great-Grandpa had a 1.5-story frame-constructed dwelling with a front porch. There's some sort of an outbuilding up at the top, and a stable is located in the back. The stable has the X through it. After you find your ancestor's home, start exploring the neighborhood. Take a look to see which buildings are nearby. Is there a church, a school? How far away was your ancestor's business or place of employment? Make a note of any buildings or features that you should investigate to help you with your research. Looking at my great-great-grandpa's neighborhood, I can see that there's a bluff line at the end of the street. The city waterworks and a coal house is nearby. And the electric street railway and the railroad tracks are just to the north. These details add to what I want to know about my ancestor's life in the early 1900s. Another important detail to investigate is who is living nearby. You'll definitely want to meet the neighbors. If you used a census record or a city directory to find your ancestor's address, you may be able to find out who owned or lived in the dwellings nearby. This is your ancestor's fan club of friends, associates, and neighbors, so you'll want to find out who they were and how they may have interacted with your ancestors. For example, I want to know who lived in number 15 Myrtle Street. Living so close to my great-great-grandpa's family, I can't help but think they must have been close friends or maybe even family. You may also want to compare older fire insurance maps with future maps to see how the area evolved. Time and progress brought changes to your ancestor's town, so follow the residents through time using future years' maps if they're available. Take a look at Google Maps to see if your ancestor's residence is still standing. If you can, try georeferencing with older maps. Now here's a Google satellite image of what I think was the property where my great-great-grandpa lived. Now it looks like 15 and a half is no longer standing, and now there's a road running right behind the property. You can kind of still see where the bluff line is with all those trees. Finally, you want to be sure to download, save, or print a copy of the maps for future reference. And don't forget to make a note of where you found the maps online so you can return to the site later if needed. Thank you so much for taking the time to watch Find Your Family with Fire Insurance Maps. I hope you use them to find more amazing details of your ancestors' life. If you have any questions or comments, I'd love to hear from you. My contact information is here and in your syllabus. Thank you very much.